Welcome
to
the
Exhorter
podcast,
where
we
stir
up
love
and
good
works
through
bite-sized
biblical
discussion.
You missed aim to stir up, but whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's not go back. John has our episode today. John, bring us in, brother.
I was thinking about recently, I saw this article in this book, and it kind of got me a little fired up here. But before I go into that and to talk about what it said, what I'd like to talk about today is the church disappearing, and are we letting it? Right? And do we think it's declining? We'll kind of start with that one. Do you think the church is shrinking based upon your feeling?
And do you mean that in a congregational sense or like in a bigger denominational sense?
No, in a universal church perspective, but also local. Do you have those moments where you look around and you realize, or you think that the church is shrinking? Have you felt that way before?
Yeah, I always think about the people that moved away and say, well, sure, it's cheaper to live where you are, and
Sure.
the quality of life might be better, but how dare you leave us here in California?
Well, that's a little different though. Like moving causes, we talked about this before, moving just causes other places to swell, right?
And
So
I don't think we're talking about people moving away. I think we're talking about losing people
to the world. Yeah.
Yeah, to the world. So that's
what's your gut or feeling reaction to that? Do you think that it's really happening?
Do I think that like the church is actually shrinking?
Yeah, universal, followers of Christ.
I mean, the evidence that I see is that it is. You know, I've preached at a handful of little congregations,
Mm-hmm.
In this area, right? So I'm making my statement here based on 4 or 5 congregations that I've preached at.
Sure.
But I have seen those, witnessed them literally shrink. Some of them decreased by half.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But is that losing people to the world, or is that just simply?
No, that's losing them to death.
We're not replacing people as some are dying.
Yeah, no, this was not replacing them as some are dying.
So there's kind of a couple questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Is are we losing people to the world, or are we simply not growing at a rate that is sustainable? So growth versus losing people to the world, those are kind of two different questions, but related to each other.
Yeah. No, and I think that that's understandable. I mean, the book that sparked me thinking about this is called At the Blue Hole, Elegy for a Church on the Edge. And like I said, I haven't read this book. I just kind of saw a synopsis of it, and I saw an article that mentioned it, and then there's some stats there, right? And so what it is talking about is saying that non-instrumental churches of Christ, which that's kind of like the way that you would filter it down to, a lot of.
You see why I frame my question about in a denominational sense?
Well, that's the thing is when you're looking at data, we're not really good in the church, I'd say universal, at actually collecting good data on our local churches, let alone universal, to really understand and get a temp check. But from the available information, we'll say that from the available information, and this focus being the non-instrumental churches of Christ for a reason, I'll explain why. They're posturing that they are in a rapid decline. Since 2015, they've lost approximately 2,000 members per month, 9 congregations per month, which seems like a lot. Now, granted, I don't know that is what I would consider a Church of Christ. Okay, but their thought is that if trends continue, they could shrink to 1/3 of their 1985, like the height of, people say the height of the church, by 2050. So that is how many years? 25 years? So in like 25 years, we would be at like 1/3 that kind of a decline. Why they say it's happening, I think is interesting, and we can talk about, is they posture it's happening because radical congregation autonomy, there's little to no coordination between churches. They see that as a fault. Okay, there's too few congregations to offset the closures, so they're not offsetting the loss, right? They're not creating. There are no new congregations kind of replacing congregations. And I think we kind of can see that a lot of times. We see more congregations closing than we see new congregations opening in general, anecdotally. They say they are vehemently opposed to change. So as they're talking about, I could consider us, we got our heels dug in. And
get with the times or get left behind.
Exactly. And then they say too many congregations have given up reaching new audiences. So they say we're basically we're lacking evangelism, right? So we're not replacing churches. We're lacking evangelism. We're opposed to changing with the times, and there's no coordination between churches.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So I get some of those.
Yeah.
Sure. I can see how they would say that.
Yeah.
Their proposed solutions, though, kind of tilt their hand, kind of tell you where they're coming from. They think we need to have increased collaboration and coordination among congregations, rekindling a clear vision for mission in North America. Okay. I think that's more political ideology. Invest in church planting organizations and leadership development. So that's more like the church missionary type work or with satellite churches, creating those kinds of things.
You have the mothership and then you have...
And considering measured adaptability in worship to outreach methods. Okay, that's just saying we need to be more open to social audiences.
Yeah.
Right? And also some of that is adaptation of women in the worship.
Oh, yeah.
These kinds of things. They say we need to adapt to the social norms. And so I don't agree with the solutions that they're saying, we need to adapt to culture.
Sure.
But I think the warning signs are worth paying attention to a little bit. I don't, like I say, it's very difficult to know if that is real empirical data, if you guys like me to bring in here.
Yeah.
But, Barnes and everything will say that in 1976, 91% of Americans identified as Christian. Today, it went from 91 to today 64%. So we do understand that people who are faith-based or believing in God has significantly changed in 40 years. Well, it's probably 50 years. And weekly church attendance has dropped from 42% to 30% in the last 20 years. And over 4,500 churches closed in the U.S. in 2019 alone. That was before COVID. So there was already a decline of the amount of churches before COVID, and COVID had an effect. We saw that. So it feels like if I understand this book's perspective, and the articles are get with the times, Churches of Christ, non-instrumental worship, Churches of Christ, get with the times, or you're gonna fail in your close. And I see their data there, and I feel like the data is probably true as far as the decline rate, but I feel like I believe that more based upon the larger big picture data rate, which is people are starting, people have left the faith in general, like all Christian faith, in decline. So I can kind of see that. And then anecdotally, we look around and we see churches closing, and like, especially in California, we've heard of congregations closing just because of economic reasons. The rent was too high on buildings.
Can't support a full-time preacher.
Exactly. And so then what they end up doing is they end up swelling or combining with other congregations, swelling. People drive further, aged out. A lot of congregations get aged out. There are no young people. And I'm wondering then also, where are all the young people? Are we not keeping them in the church, or are we not bringing in new ones? Kind of like Kyle said in the beginning. So, what would you take from hearing those stats in their perspective? Do you think it's overblown? Is there something to learn there for all this? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm kind of thinking in two different directions here. One is about how do we react to those kinds of alarming stats?
Sure.
Versus, I also have some thoughts about their solutions. So kind of going in two different directions. I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 9, where he says, I made myself a servant to all that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, to win the weak. I had become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now I do this for the gospel's sake, that I may be a partaker of it with you. Is there some, I agree with you in terms of their solutions as stated or as they intend them. I reject them too.
Yeah.
But if you dig down deeper, is there some element of truth to that? The idea of get with the times. Well, shouldn't there be some adaptation to where our world and where our culture is today, but not to the degree maybe they're suggesting like, oh, well, we need to include women, get with the times. Well, okay, that comes back to a biblical principle that we're not probably going to address in this podcast.
Yeah.
So we're not abandoning biblical principles. There are things we need to hold on to and hills that are worth dying on. But isn't there maybe some truth with this idea of what can we do or what should we do to adapt to our current audience? So I don't want to reject outright their suggestions, but as they propose them, yes, I see problems with that.
Yeah. I like what you mentioned there, Kyle. I think we do need to adapt to the challenges that the community around us is facing so that we can be like Paul, be influential with those people. And I'm thinking of like, I don't know, like the problems today with drugs. You know, that wasn't as much of a problem 20, 30 years ago. And there are unique things that those people need from a spiritual perspective that, you know, maybe someone struggling with something else doesn't need. And so adapting to how can we help those folks? I think that there's value. I think that there's value in making that kind of change. Or like with social media, you know, like 20 years ago, people weren't preaching about social media. And now it's mentioned relatively regularly. And so should we adapt to that? Yes. Should we be quick to adapt to that? I think we should. And sometimes we're not.
No, I like that. Kyle, did you do you remember that Wilson Adams article, 12 Thinking Shifts Among Millennial and Gen Z Christians? Did you guys read that?
He wrote a book.
Was that a book?
He wrote a, well, I don't know if it was, if what you're referring to
was
was
a long form article,
but he wrote, yeah.
And Excelsior Moore did a podcast on it too. And I'd like to actually go through and listen to the podcast that he does, and then have our own reaction on that one, because I think there's a lot of interesting points there. But the theme of that too is there are some things and shifts in the different generations that are not bad. People are wanting more deeper connections, spiritually. And so there's different thinking shifts. And I think that is, like you're saying, too, Nate, is you meet the people where they have the need. You can, address that without, rewriting the principles or truth, right? And not ditching, our core belief system. But you can meet people where they are, just like Jesus did. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. So that's for another podcast.
Sure.
We'll look at that one. But I think that's just really important to take into consideration that, yes, their solutions are not warranted in my mind. But I think that as far as the big picture goes, I think there's a problem. And I think that we need to take it seriously enough to then think introspectively a little bit on what are we doing as individuals? What are we doing as congregations to help stave off this? And I think that as a parent, I think of the church locally and the church universal and it being around here for many years. And there's a point in the high school class where I mentioned to the kids that after 90 years, your name will probably be forgotten.
Yeah.
Once you're dead, 90 years will pass. Most people don't remember the first name of their great-great-grandfather. It just kind of passes after a certain amount of time. That was kind of sobering to the kids. And we talked about that when we talked about like leaving a legacy here. Why is that important? And why do you feel like it's important to like grow a company or achieve some sort of fame and those kinds of things that a lot of people will seek in this life versus the ultimate life after this one, right? And if there's any exception to that, I do think that lasting legacy, I think of is what have I done to help strengthen the church for many years to come until Jesus comes,
right. Yeah.
And so I do take that seriously.
It's not about keeping my name relevant after I'm gone. It's about keeping
his
Jesus' name strong and glorified.
And I do think in that context, I think legacy of the church is important, and I want to do whatever I can to strengthen it in truth so that it lasts.
Well, I'm not quite done with this initial idea, though. With some of their suggestions, again, the way they proposed them, I disagree with, along with you. But like, let's look at the underlying suggestion. And so some of the other things they talked about is a greater emphasis. What was the wording of it? A greater emphasis on was it evangelism in North America, and then church cooperation. I kind of want to look at those two, but how do they word that again?
I'm looking at a summary of it, but basically increased collaboration and coordination between congregations. We'll take that one first.
But then also a greater structure or something. I forget how they worded it about evangelism in North America. That's the one that.
Yeah, I think invest in church planting. Maybe.
Yeah, and there was something about evangelism in North America, but the idea of church cooperation and working together, and this idea of a greater emphasis on church planting or evangelism. I think some of those ideas you talked about the issues of the 50s and 60s with like the we call it evangelism societies, or where you get some of the issues that related to institutions outside of the church doing the work of the church, like the missionary societies, things like that. And so, some of those ideas, which sounds like what they might be proposing, or the idea of church planting, usually takes the form of you have a mother church and then there's several other satellite churches or campuses of that church. And I would agree with you that idea sounds really unbiblical. But can we take it back and maybe look at, is there another approach along those lines of that suggestion? Nate, you talked about there's a lot of churches in the area that are small, struggling, can't afford a preacher full time, dwindling. Yeah. And so we've kind of been sucked into this model of an evangelist it's sort of like an employee model, where an evangelist is attached to one church, and he does all the teaching and preaching for that group. Yeah. And I sometimes I just wonder, could we look at, if this is a big issue, should we be taking a look at maybe, are we doing things maybe not in an unbiblical way, but is it the most biblical? Is it the most advantageous way to biblically do things, or is there a different arrangement that is still biblical? Sure. And sometimes I wonder if the preaching and teaching that we typically see of preachers might be better suited for shepherds or elders shepherding the flock, feeding the flock. Yeah. And evangelism. And what do we see with evangelists? Yeah. You know what? What if a preacher lived in this area and was able to go, and the idea of church building or church planting? Well, what if an evangelist spent 6 months with a group, building them up, giving instruction on evangelism, starting some evangelism programs with that church, and equipping people to do that work? So instead of dwindling or just like, preaching a sermon every 2 or 3 months on a rotation, it's let me focus some time. And if that's what an evangelist did and was fully supported by some of the bigger churches, and that's me kind of thinking out loud. You guys can challenge me if this sounds unbiblical to you, but
Kyle just wants to go preach in Hawaii.
But just imagine, let's just say we got a good sized church here. I'm very gracious that I don't work any other jobs, and I'm very well supported to do the work I do. But this is just me thinking out loud. We've got 7 fantastic elders and that excel at teaching and preaching. And I'm not trying to say I don't want to teach and preach. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. This is me thinking out loud, just wondering, well, okay, maybe not the way they suggested it, but I think of Epaphras in the letter to the Colossians. In Paul's introduction, he says, as you learned about the grace of God from Epaphras, our dear fellow servant, who's a faithful minister of Christ on your behalf. And then at the end of the Colossian letter, he says, Epaphras, who is one of you, a bondservant of Christ, greets you, always laboring fervently for you in prayers, that you may stand perfect and complete in all the will of God. For I bear him witness that he has a great zeal for you and those who are in Laodicea and those who are in Hierapolis. And this is the one where he tells him, when you get this letter, well, share it with those in Laodicea. And when they get theirs, you read it there. And so you talk about church cooperation. And yeah, there's church autonomy that we need to absolutely respect. And this idea of a mother church and satellite churches is not biblical. But when I look at the work of Epaphras, a minister, it seems like he was not an employee of one specific congregation in that church only.
Well, you look at, I mean, the biggest example I think is Paul. Paul wasn't a
and so that's where
he's an apostle, but
he's wearing two hats. He's an apostle, but also a lot of what we see him doing is more like a minister or evangelist.
Well, and he had someone go with him on those trips, right? Like Timothy and Silas. And so they're doing the same kind of work that Paul is doing, and yet they're not an employee of the church at Corinth or the church at Galatia. Although these churches did support them.
But at times you would see like Timothy or Titus stay in one place for a while.
Yeah.
Like I left you in Crete to set in order things that are lacking, appoint elders.
But wasn't it in Crete, wasn't Titus planting many churches, like many congregations? Like Crete, wasn't it big enough that, not everybody can meet over here, that he would go around to different parts of the island?
And I see John staring at me. I know this is not the way he wanted this podcast to go, but and you guys can challenge me on this, because I know that I'm suggesting is just thinking out loud, and there's definitely some things that maybe give pause to this, like, again, church autonomy, and what if a church doesn't want an evangelist to come in and work with them? Like, we got to respect that. We can't just be like, we're the big church in town and you got to take our preacher and let him work with you. I get that there's concerns with that. I'm just trying to think out loud here.
The biggest question is what you're talking about, unbiblical. Basically, what you're saying is, could I potentially go to this congregation or that congregation, work with them to build those congregations up, and take my support from,
we already have people that do that.
But what if it wasn't like, we have 5 or 6 people that rotate the pulpit in some of these smaller churches. And what if it wasn't just disjointed, one sermon from this guy, one sermon from this guy? What if it was more focused on, let's actually come in and have a purpose, spend a chunk of time and try to accomplish equipping and help this congregation be more self-sustaining with evangelism.
A coordinated effort.
And because what these preachers do, well, what I did anyways, and I think the other preachers that I know that have gone around to local congregations in the area that cannot afford a full-time minister, what they do is they go there and they preach, and then the next week it's somebody else. So they're there for 2 hours, right? And then they leave, and what the next guy does the next week may or may not complement what the guy the previous week did before, but they're not. Yes. Are they maybe feeding the flock? Sure. But are they doing any more than that? No. And there's more to be done.
Does that model with Epaphras only work because an apostle is the one directing where these people are going? So I do see there's legitimate questions.
Yeah.
And I am definitely thinking out loud, and that doesn't mean I've thought through all of this yet.
Yeah, well,
but I just wonder, like, okay, I don't like their suggestions as worded, but is there something there we could maybe look at and evaluate?
Well, let me yes and that, because I don't think you're wrong, and I would like to think a little bit more.
Thank you.
And I would like to think a little bit more
through
between ourselves why we think this is the case. If churches are declining, what are some of the reasons that might be the case? And I do think that the one that they point out that you're focusing on is when we wanted to stave off institutionalism and churches becoming what was the term? But basically, satellite churches, and basically, we wanted to stave that off. We swung the pendulum the other way, and we almost have no communication other than like a gospel meeting or a singing every once in a while. We kind of think of like an us and them mentality, and what people are doing in other cases. And the only time that we ever go to those congregations or really kind of invest in those relationships is when we're traveling through one that's not near us, on vacations or something, or maybe a couple people are preaching here and there, or we have like gospel meetings and stuff. But most of the time we know people at those congregations, but we really haven't, we kind of just felt like there is a reason because there's multiple different congregations, and we kind of just focused inward. And I do think that's important. That's what the elder's job is focus inward on the needs and the growing the members here and ministering to the members here. But as members of the Church Universal, I don't think we needed to swing the pendulum too hard to the other side. I do think that we can foster better relationships, and we have the moral based singing here in next weekend. And that is an opportunity where lots of different people from different congregations are coming together. And I think that fostering that kind of feeling, those kinds of opportunities, one, it shows our kids that the church is larger. The church as a whole is larger than just their local congregation. We just came from camp, right, Kyle? One of the great things that these kids get to do is they meet peers from all over a region and get to know them. And I think that that's actually a very great opportunity to meet other Christians. And so
I feel like maybe, I don't want to paint in too broad of strokes, but I worry that sometimes the righteous concern for autonomy has been misinterpreted to isolation.
Yeah, and that's what I said. The pendulum swung really hard the other way. And a lot of times we've seen that, and I think that we just need to recognize that it doesn't necessarily need to be that way.
Yeah.
But maybe they have a valid point in saying because we don't have it, we have fewer interactions as a whole, and that's one of the reasons for decline. What other reasons do you think might be, if we believe that congregations in general are declining, what other reasons can you think of?
Well, an inward focus. All I have to draw on is what scriptures say and my own experience, right? And so I look back at my experience with the different churches I've been involved with, the different congregations I've been involved with. And one of the things that I see looking back is that it was very inward focused. It was us versus them. When I say that, I mean it was us versus the world, and it was us versus all of the other congregations who do things differently than we do. You know, they're all going straight to hell. And so it was a very like inward focused thing. Well, we got to, and we do have to do things doctrinally, like according to truth. And we do need to do that, but we need to also like focus on saving the lost. And that was not, for me, that was not something that we focused on. It was more like, well, just make sure you're doing everything on Sunday exactly as it says in the book, and you'll be okay. And I think that is a just, one part of a much bigger pie.
Yeah. Well, so that's one of the things I have written down here is maybe common causes to consider, and that is there's no urgency. I don't think we think about this a lot. We get wrapped up in our daily lives. We see each other once or twice a week, and we spend a few hours in the Word together and in relationships with each other, and then we go back to our lives. And we don't see, it's like the frog being boiled over time. We don't see the sense of urgency because we're looking at a micro level. We don't see over time. And if we look back over time, as someone who takes pictures of the members of the congregation for a board, and who swaps out pictures of people who move or who leave, and like if I showed some sort of time-lapse mosaic of that board, it would probably be shocking, right? Because there's a lot of movement over time. And the problem is we don't think that way. We think very static, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. But and so I feel like that there's no sense of urgency. And I feel like that sometimes it's important for deacons and elders and evangelists to kind of remind and be the people in that sense. It's not like you have to be afraid and scared and reactory all the time. But I do think it's really important to understand that there is a sense of urgency to growing this church, growing the church with members, with finding and retaining, right?
Is sports analogy, prevent defense. It's almost like we've been running a prevent defense for the last, I don't know how many years, 30 plus years. And come on, how many teams football teams have you seen run a prevent defense, and then the offense just walks right down the field and scores, right? And so we're running a prevent defense, and we're not out there on offense trying to win, trying to score. And I think that is a detriment that I see in myself, and that I think the congregations I've been a part of struggle with, and that even we here struggle with. And I think that we could do a better job of going out there and winning. And when I say that, I mean winning souls, inviting people, trying to help people, trying to have Bible studies with them, etc.
Yeah, and so I will give a scripture for this. So Matthew 5:16, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. If our churches are dimming, maybe it's because too few Christians are boldly letting their light shine, and also reaching out to people. So lack of outreach. I have four reasons myself, and I'll just state them for time's sake of thinking. There's no sense of urgency. There's lack of outreach. There's a lack of living it in our own lives. And people see that all the time from the outside. They understand the hypocrisy of that. And then we have a fear of offending people. And so a lot of times it kind of stifles us from evangelism and from also reaching out to people in our work. We're reaching out to family members who are fallen away, reaching out to people. And we have this kind of sense of fear, I think, that we need to get overcome. And so we have some verses like, Romans 10:14, how then will they call upon him whom they have not believed? Mm-hmm. And how are they to believe in him who have not ever heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? The gospel won't reach the lost all by itself unless we open our mouths. And so because people can't believe in a savior that they never heard about. And so I think that's the theme here is it's if the church is declining, it's because of us. And it's because we're not living our faith out there strong enough, and we're not reaching the lost. And that's just the same thing over and over. There's not really a big formula to it. It's just that simple.
You could probably pin it on number of conversations.
Sure.
If we all just increased the number of conversations we had,
that's a salesman
about
right there.
God.
Thinking,
I mean, seriously, and yes, that is totally the sales perspective. When I was in sales, it was always just a matter of like, hey,
it's a numbers game.
It's a numbers game. Follow the script. It's a numbers game. Follow the script. And so you do that. And I think that if we did that, not that
that's more of the Mormon model.
Well, not follow the script so much in like I wrote everything down, I'm going to read it to you, but more of the general idea of just talking to people. About God and genuinely getting into real conversations where maybe you do oppose what they have to say and they do oppose what you have to say, but you reason from the scriptures on those things.
Follow the script. I sort of interpreted that in a positive sense, of course. Going off our first point is, do we need to change with the times? Do we need to adapt? And in a small way, yes, but also let's understand in a major sense, no.
Yeah.
Because 1 Corinthians 1 says, since the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know God. It pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. So we don't want to change the message. Maybe how we present the message to a degree, maybe our methodology could be rethought, but the message itself, if we're concerned that it's unpopular, then we just have to accept that and be bold in how we preach it and be wise in how we maybe face some antagonism from people who don't like the message, but the message cannot ever change. So when he said, stick to the script, I think what you're saying is there's only one way to be saved, and it's through the foolishness of the message preached. Or another way to think about it is in Matthew 18, the Great Commission, Matthew 28:18, go into all the world and make disciples. If our concern is filling this building, there's so many ways to do that effectively.
Yeah. But that is not necessarily making disciples.
But our goal is to make disciples, and that only comes through the gospel message.
And John, you brought up the point of we see each other 2 hours a week, and that's all well and good. There's nothing wrong with that. But doing life together, I think, is what makes disciples. When you invite someone into your life, not just into the Bible. Yeah, that's great. And we should start there. But into our lives, I think that's what makes disciples and really builds relationships, number one, with God, but also with each other. And that's what gets people to continue. Partially, not wholly, but.
Well, John, let me kind of cover the other side of the coin. Is you asked us our reactions to some of what you discussed in those trends. And said, first of all, like, let's not completely dismiss the question of what could we be doing differently? Could we adapt a little bit of our approach? But I think the other side of it is, how alarming is this trend? And I think if we're concerned, we need to allow that emotion. Emotion is good at stirring us to do something, but emotion is not good at dictating those actions. If we're worried about this, what is that worry going to accomplish? I'm worried about the state of the church in a big universal sense. And what can you do to fix the universal church? And are you the head of that church anyway? Is it your problem to fix the church across the world? Besides, I think we're also thinking very geographically here, as we're seeing a trend in America, but I'm hearing that there's a lot of thriving churches in the Philippines and in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And so if you're worried, you should be, but also don't become consumed with that worry. Don't let it become anxiety about something you can't fix in a universal sense. God's kingdom is going to be just fine. Jesus is head of his kingdom. He's king. He's on the throne. He knows what he's doing. His kingdom's going to be just fine. Don't let that worry consume you. If you feel worried or anxious about the state of things, well, let that worry drive some action, but don't let that action be dictated by the worry. What can I do? Well, who's the next person I can talk to? Focus on the next person you can talk to. Focus on the next seed you can plant. Plant the seed, encourage it, water it. Let God give the increase if there's going to be an increase.
No, and I really agree that that's the case. I mean, I want to disagree with you about not being worried about it. And I'm not saying to the extent that, like, I don't want people to be anxious about it, but I also want a little sense of uncomfortableness, because that's also what gets us to spur to do something in action and not just take things for granted. I don't think that's what you're saying.
I'm just saying, manage your level of is God's kingdom going to fail because of us?
No, church,
it's God's kingdom.
The church isn't dying because God is weaker. It's shrinking because we've stopped sowing, is my point. God does grant the increase. I just think that if we want growth, it starts in our homes, in our hearts, in our conversations, Nate, and in prayers. We can't wait for a program or a preacher or someone to spark these things to happening. And we always kind of get that in gospel meetings and stuff. We feel like kind of rejuvenated, or we go to camp and we feel rejuvenated. And but the thing is, at the end of the day, if the church is shrinking, it's not because God isn't working. It's just because.
Well, and it's not like his kingdom will cease to exist.
Exactly. And I think that's the surety that I do want to balance here.
We
and
do
I
need
think
to
that's
feel
what you're
some
saying
urgency. We should have some concern and even a little bit of worry, but we need to manage those emotions and direct it into useful endeavors. And talking to someone about the gospel, inviting someone, that is a useful way to do something about those concerns or worries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I do think there are personal actions. I do think there's congregational actions. See what your congregation is doing to try to encourage people and bring people together. Find, the different events and things like this for singings and other things. We do a lot of things around here. Please take part in those things. See those as opportunities to invite people, to have conversations with people, more conversations. And then what are you doing in your own lives? Who are people in your lives that you're, you could probably count 3 people, lost people in your life that you should reach out to, that you're not reaching out to. Invite those people, share your faith with them, look for spiritual conversations in everyday life. Do our part. And I said, bringing this topic today isn't just, I don't want to give too much credence to someone else's worry over the church universal and everything. Kyle, you're right. It's in God's hands. It's just, its growth is also in our hands, and we have commission to do so. And I do think that it takes some introspection to try to reflect and understand, what are you doing? And are you doing what you should be doing in that case? Your
salvation isn't the end of the story. And sometimes we get to that point where if I get to go to heaven, then I achieved everything. Like, that's what it's all about. And yes, I want to be in heaven and I want you to be in heaven. But if we look at salvation as it's completed when I'm saved, and we're not thinking about now, how am I bringing this salvation to others? How am I furthering God's kingdom? How am I glorifying God every day? How am I making sacrifices and taking up my cross every day so that others might live? That's the point of being saved.
Someone told me one time that heaven is the reward and saving souls is the mission. And I think sometimes we get the mission and the reward like mixed up. Like we say, well, the mission is to get to heaven. Well, yeah, I guess so. Certainly. But I think more along the lines of that's the reward. And the mission is go save souls. Think about the Great Commission. Jesus didn't say, go out and be saved. Certainly, he wants people to be saved. He said, go make disciples. That's the mission. And that's what we should be doing here. And that's what we should be doing more of. Certainly, we want to get to heaven. And faith in Christ and obedience to his word is how we do that. But that's the reward, not the mission.
Yeah, I'll leave it with Colossians 4:2-4. Continue steadfastly in prayer. And this is speaking to members of our congregation, members in other congregations. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, also pray. Pray also for us, that God may open us a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ. So look for those opportunities, pray for them, and pray for the church. Pray for the local church, Universal.
Thank you, John, for pointing out what could be some alarming statistics and trends. But I appreciate the conversation that we had, and I hope you guys take away that, well, we should have some concern and some sense of urgency about what's going on in the world and in the church and locally and in a universal sense. We also need to manage those concerns with prayer, with dependence on God, and simply looking at what's the next thing I can do to further God's kingdom. There's a lot going on in the world that I can't control, but the world that's right in front of me, the people that I encounter, that's where I need to live. That's the influence I need to emphasize, and I want to do God's work right where I live. Well, thank you, John, for that conversation. I hope it's been helpful to you guys as well. Go and further God's kingdom wherever you live and leave the increase up to God. If you've enjoyed this podcast, thank you for tuning in, and I'm rambling now, so just listen next week.
Share.
Thank you. See you next week. Bye. Hey, we should finish by all taking turns saying a word at a time.
Thank you.
No, I'm not playing this game.
John's like, no, we're not doing that.
Someone can lead. That was the title.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. I did the last one.
Yeah, you did the last one.
Thank you.
You want me to do it?
No, I got it.
All right.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun to edit that together, guys. Good job. Collaboration, good participation.
I'm sensing some sarcasm.
You never think about what it's going to take me to edit.
Actually, I give a lot of thought to how it's going to be in the edit and how can I undermine that process.
Yeah,
I give it a lot of thought.
Yeah. John doesn't do enough work for the church. Let's give him more.